Imagine your child being charged with crimes that you know were false. Now imagine sitting in a courtroom listening to officials boldly lie on your child in order to get your child convicted. That's what happened in my son Deshaun Rashard Thomas's case. Let me say this again. When my 17-year-old son Deshaun Rashard Thomas was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, he pled not guilty. All Deshaun wanted was a fair and just trial. As his mother, as a natural instinct, I had to be Deshaun's eyes and ears wherever possible. Even more so when I learned that State Attorney Willie Meggs had assigned Assistant State Attorney Jack Campbell to prosecute the case. The double murder case was being investigated by Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell. Assistant State Attorney Jack Campbell is the son of Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell. The father and son team was destined to be maliciously prosecuted, and the prosecution was extremely malicious. Right away, Circuit Judge James Hankinson was underhandedly plotting with the Office of Regional Counsel and Prosecutor Jack Campbell to get Deshaun convicted. Over a 30-day span, Circuit Judge James Hankinson was conducting case events outside of Deshaun's presence. Deshaun had no idea about any of the events. When I hired an attorney named Gregory Cummings to Deshaun's case, I offered to hire a private investigator to assist Mr. Cummings, but Mr. Cummings kept putting me off. While Deshaun sat in the Leon County Jail waiting for a fair trial, the plot to get Deshaun convicted for the murders wasn't going too well. Since there was no material, physical, or circumstantial evidence against Deshaun, State Prosecutor Jack Campbell heavily relied on the testimonies of Detective Don Odom and 21-year-old Mr. Ross. Mr. Ross and Deshaun were co-workers and friends. 6 weeks prior to the double murder investigation, Deshaun had temporarily moved into Mr. Ross's one-bedroom apartment. Deshaun slept on the living room couch. Deshaun moving in with Mr. Ross was a matter of convenience. Mr. Ross's apartment was less than a half a mile away from the fast food restaurant where Deshaun and Mr. Ross worked, and Deshaun was in his 3rd semester at Tallahassee Community College and didn't have a car. Mr. Ross's apartment was on the main city bus line. All college students were able to ride the city bus for free or at a reduced rate with their college ID. The 2 victims that had been murdered, Deshaun's ex-girlfriend and her brother, lived nearly 20 miles away from Mr. Ross's apartment. Mr. Cummings told Deshaun and me that it was Mr. Ross who gave incriminating statements to Detective Odom, and that's what led Detective Odom to prepare the summary of offense for 2 counts of first-degree murder and probable cause that got Deshaun charged and arrested for the murders. Nothing more, nothing less. Mr. Cummings was Deshaun's attorney for 16 months and had not deposed Mr. Ross or Detective Odom or any other law enforcement officers. Mr. Ross, who was facing minor cultivation of marijuana charges, was out on jail on pretrial release. It was said that Mr. Ross had gotten permission from the judge on his case, Circuit Judge Charles Dodson, to move out of Tallahassee and move back to his hometown. According to court records, the Leon County Clerk of Court did not have a valid address on file for Mr. Ross. According to Mr. Ross's court docket, for at least 2 years, there had been numerous of notices of pretrial hearings that were returned to the Leon County Clerk of Court's office as unclaimed. Instead of Circuit Judge Charles Dodson issuing an arrest warrant for Mr. Ross having violated conditions of his pretrial release, Circuit Judge Dodson kept rescheduling Mr. Ross's hearings. And instead of Mr. Cummings being honest with Deshaun about why Deshaun's pretrial kept being rescheduled, which happened about 4 or 5 times over a year and a half, Mr. Cummings, State Prosecutor Jack Campbell, and Circuit Judge Hankinson were playing duck, duck, goose to purposely delay Deshaun's trial. In August 2012, I advised Deshaun to fire Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings' practice was unethical. Mr. Cummings refused to disclose Deshaun's AT&T cell phone records and the victim's autopsy reports, both of which would have exonerated Deshaun. State Prosecutor Jack Campbell refused to allow the medical examiner's office to release the victim's autopsy reports to the public. But just about every time I tuned in to Tallahassee News, WCTV News reporter Julie Montanaro reported that medical examiner reports that the female victim was 21 weeks pregnant with Deshawn's baby and that Deshawn murdered her because Deshawn didn't want her to have the baby. It seems Julie Montanaro knew more about the female victim's autopsy report than Deshawn, and Deshawn was the one sitting in the Leon County Jail for murdering her and her brother. Only DNA test results would have shown that Deshawn was the father of her unborn baby. Because while Deshawn and I knew that she was pregnant, Deshawn wasn't for sure if he was the father of her unborn baby. Deshawn and her dated about 6 weeks when she announced that she was pregnant. The breakup between Deshawn and her was mutual. There was no animosity between them. During the time of her and Deshawn dating, she was 19 years old. He had just turned 17 years old. She was already a mother of a toddler, and she realized that Deshawn was just 17 years old, which is what I told her when she and Deshawn first started dating. By the time she and her brother were found murdered, she and Deshawn had been apart for 3 months, but they were still friends and still communicated. She and I developed a somewhat friendship. We kept in touch with each other. As a matter of fact, I had just spoken with her 2 days before she was found murdered. Now, what Deshawn and I learned after the murders was that at the time of her murder, she had a 21-year-old boyfriend, and her boyfriend told detectives that he believed that he was the father of her unborn baby. We learned that her boyfriend and her had dated over a year and a half before the break in their relationship when she briefly dated Deshawn. The boyfriend at the time of her murder was not the father of her toddler daughter, but had been a father figure in her daughter's life and had a close relationship with her mom and other family members. So where did Julie Montanaro get the DNA test results from? As I explained to Deshawn, the only reason for State Prosecutor Jack Campbell to not want the victim's autopsy reports to be released to the public is to cover up for his daddy, Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell, wrongfully having Deshawn charged with the murders. The only reason for Mr. Cummings not disclosing information that can exonerate Deshawn was because Mr. Cummings was a part of the conspiracy, and Mr. Cummings and others were all on in embezzling money from me. In August 2012, Deshawn had been in the Leon County Jail for nearly 2 years. After Deshawn fired Mr. Cummings, Deshawn's case defaulted back to the court to appoint an attorney. The same day Mr. Cummings filed his motion to withdraw from Deshawn's case, State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland filed a summary of offense for solicitation to commit first-degree murder, with the target being Mr. Ross. In a press conference, State Attorney Willie Meggs announced that Deshawn had solicited a fellow Leon County Jail inmate, Mr. Williams, who is a gang member, to murder Mr. Ross. Also, State Attorney Willie Meggs stated that Deshawn is also a gang member. Circuit Judge James Hankinson, Deshawn's presiding judge for nearly 2 years, had approved the probable cause and signed the arrest warrant. At that point, Deshawn was thrown in solitary confinement and unable to have visitors and unable to make phone calls. As I continued to complain to Governor Rick Scott and Attorney General Pam Bondi about Circuit Judge James Hankinson, and at the same time begging for a special prosecutor to be assigned to the case, I was being told that they could not get involved in ongoing prosecutions. 2 of Deshawn's court-appointed regional attorneys filed motions to withdraw. Within less than a month of me complaining about Circuit Judge Hankinson again, Circuit Judge Hankinson was replaced by Circuit Judge Jackie Fulford. The first hearing to be held on Deshawn's case outside of a case management hearing happened nearly 3 years after Deshawn had been charged with the murders and over a year after Deshawn had been charged with solicitation to commit first-degree murder. Both cases had been consolidated. On August 19, 2013, at this evidentiary hearing, State Prosecutor Jack Campbell called State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland to the witness stand to discuss the solicitation to commit first-degree murder investigation. In the summary of offense for solicitation to commit first-degree murder, State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland states, "I received information from an anonymous complainant that I need to speak with inmate Dewan Williams. I'm going to show you a copy of the first page of the summary of offense for solicitation to commit first-degree murder and probable cause prepared by State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland showing that particular statement. Please look. State Prosecutor Jack Campbell, in his arrogance, incriminates himself as being the source of linking State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland to Leon County Jail inmate DeJuan Williams, and State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland agrees. Please watch.
Ready, Mr. Campbell?
Could you state your name for the record?
Jason Newland, Newlin.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm an investigator at the State Attorney's Office.
And are you currently assigned to working on the Deshaun Thomas case?
Yes, sir, I am.
Did there come a part in time during the last year or 2 years that I requested you to investigate a plot to kill a witness, Trenton Ross?
Yes, there was.
So we see that there was no anonymous complainant after all. State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland agreeing with State Prosecutor Jack Campbell as the source of the solicitation to commit murder investigation, not an anonymous complainant, simply makes State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland a liar. Unfortunately, Regional Counsel Darren Shippey, Deshaun's fifth attorney on the case, did not move to impeach State Attorney Investigator Jason Newland, so the show continued on as it was business as usual. Since there is no physical, material, or circumstantial evidence against Deshaun in regards to the murders, the main focus were those who played roles in the solicitation to commit first-degree murder plot. So as the solicitation to commit first-degree murder plot became front and center, so did the change of the motive for Deshaun having committed the murders. So now, instead of the motive being Deshaun murdering the female victim because Deshaun didn't want her to have the baby, the motive was now Deshaun having murdered the male victim because of gang misrepresentation, and Deshaun murdering the possible mother of his unborn child because she was there in the townhome at the time that he was home. My son Deshaun was a full-time college student and worked over 35 hours a week at a very busy fast food restaurant. By the time Deshaun was officially labeled as a gang member, Deshaun had been in the Leon County Jail for over a year and had fired his attorney. Deshaun told me that law enforcement officers told him that if he didn't sign a form stating that he was a gang member, then he was going to be charged with perjury. During the evidentiary hearing, 3 Leon County Sheriff law enforcement officers testified in regards to a threat against the female victim's life and a confrontation that the female victim had been involved in just a day or so before her and her brother were found murdered. All 3 law enforcement officers testified that they had not followed through with the investigation that led or any leads that the family had provided for them. Of the 3 law enforcement officers to testify was Detective McBride, who was the first lead detective on the double murder case. After Deshaun's arrest, Detective McBride stated that Detective Odom was not being truthful in the probable cause report. She was then replaced by Detective Odom. Other Leon County Sheriff law enforcement officers were subpoenaed by Regional Counsel Darren Shippey to appear at the hearing, but did not show up. The woman who had made threats against the female victim's life was also subpoenaed to the hearing, but she did not show up either. Regional Counsel Darren Shippey mentions the failure to appear of those whom he subpoenaed. Circuit Judge Fulford does not say anything of significance in that regards.